All right, we're here for another YouTube video, Clean Technica YouTube video discussion. Today we've got Larry Evans, Paul Fosse, Steve Hanley, and myself, Zach Shahan. We're looking to talk about one topic per video. So this is, this is a sort of a new format we're trying out, and I think will be a lot of fun. But today we're going to be talking about Tesla's unboxing process and all kinds of manufacturing issues around that, but that's just sort of the center of the topic. Since this week or recently, there was Tesla received patents for part of this, and Steve Hanley wrote an article about this for us. So I'm going to let Steve start off the discussion by explaining what Tesla is doing with this unboxing process, and then we'll let Larry and Paul jump in as well.
Well, Zachary, basically, the assembly line was invented by Henry Ford almost a century ago. And it was, at the time, a remarkable improvement over one person in a blacksmith shop running around banging out all the parts and slapping them together. But it has one enduring problem, which is if something happens somewhere along the line stops. And when the line stops, the manufacturer loses money. The unboxed concept, I didn't really understand it when I started writing the article. Some of the readers will suggest I still don't understand it, but the typical way of manufacturing an automobile is to start by creating a box, which is the body, the frame, the unibody in today's world. And unfortunately, when you create a box, you have to put stuff inside it, like seats and steering wheels and pedals and air conditioning controls and infotainment systems and seat belts. And once the box is created, it's difficult to get all that stuff in it. So in essence, the concept behind the unboxed strategy is to build sub-assemblies. For instance, the front of the car, which you can then install the dashboard, the air conditioning vents, the steering wheel, the brake pedals, and all of the controls that the driver will see before it is mated to the rest of the car. It's really simple. There's a video online of the typical process where a human gets on a lift, which lifts him up and slides him in through the opening where the driver's door would normally be, and so that he can install all this stuff. And quite frankly, it looks painful. So if you do it when you're outside the box, well, it's just simpler, it's faster. And in theory, you do the rear of the car, you do the front of the car, and you do the battery pack. And then at some point, you bring all those components together and meld them, or glue them in this case, into a unit, and you're done. The car's ready to go, and it's faster, and according to Tesla, can reduce manufacturing costs by up to 40%. Which is pretty important when you're trying to compete with the Chinese, who have figured out how to build cars cheaper than anybody else in the world.
Yeah, and I remember being at the Tesla factory. We had an exclusive tour there several years back, and I remember the process of the robots coming in through the window, and I believe it was the where the front windshield would eventually be as well. But they're just like shooting in there, doing stuff, and it's like whoa, that's got to be tough. That's crazy. It's just interesting to see. Like it jumps out at you like, wow, that's pretty wild. But before we move on and discuss the pros and cons of this, Larry, Paul, anything missing from this explanation that you want to add? Anything that you can think that's? I think Steve, you did a great job. I can't think of anything to add there, but maybe they could. Good.
One thing that came up was that we talked a little bit in the comment section was the painting aspect to it. Like the idea of I'm going to paint all these individually components and then assemble it at the end. There are reasons why automakers paint it all together because it's very hard to get paint colors to match. right? Especially when you're dealing with metallic paints, you have little tiny flecks in there. It's not a solid color. Getting everything to line perfectly is sometimes a challenge. You'll sometimes see this on bumper covers not matching the rest of the car. It's one of the main ways that they would save cost on the vehicle is having the body panels painted separately. But you could also do that with a traditional assembly process. The challenge is, how do you get that in? If you need them all to be aligned while you're painting them so that they perfectly match, then you have to develop fixtures, aspects like that. So it's it's interesting from that perspective, in terms of how this all comes together, where those cost savings could be.
The other thing about, since they're going to pilot it with the Cybercab, I know that has the paint, uh, is, I believe, mixed in with the plastic or the composite
Mhm.
or whatever it's mixed in with that, although I don't think that's the entire car. There's, I believe, are still traditional painting,
Mhm.
that would need to be done. So that, um if you have traditional painting and you have some things that are injection molding, yeah, you're going to have, um, that's going to be tough to get that to all match, I would think.
Yeah, I feel like paint's one of those things where when you don't know a lot about making cars, you think that's got to be one of the simplest, easiest parts of it.
Yeah.
But then once the more you learn about it, you're like, it's held up car production at Tesla for a while in the past. It's really a complicated process apparently, and I, I mean, it's hard not to make a joke with Tesla because it's had all these issues with panel gaps and whatnot.
Mhm.
It's hard to not assume they might have issues with consistency and getting those to match and all that, if it is the issue that's being raised here. Although with the Cybercab, is there? I'm sorry, Paul. You know more, but are they painting it? I thought it was just. I thought it was not.
Well,
I
it's
thought that.
injection molded the main panels, but I would think there'd be some, uh, I would think there'd be some metal that would be painted. I don't know if they'll have injection panels over 100% of the body. That's actually something I don't know if it's. I know the majority of it is injection molded.
So I mean, do we think that it could be the case that it could take a while for Tesla to solve paint issues or to get past this, where it's you're gonna, we had the production hell of
Mhm.
the early Tesla Model 3, which really delayed that becoming a mass market, mass produced vehicle. Could this be a case of, oh, they see this as being a really great mass production technique, but it's gonna have a lot of bumps and hurdles to get to the final stage?
I think
Well, but if it's just a taxi, I don't know if you have the same quality requirements. Because does anybody look at panel gaps on their Uber or taxi the way they do when they take ownership of a vehicle?
Yeah,
I
I
tend
think
to
I
think
think
not.
for me, that's a whole separate, like, is full self driving gonna be ready for high volume robo taxis? And that's sort of like the discussion I think we're
Yeah.
trying to avoid today because
Okay.
because
Okay.
that
Okay.
would take it. I mean, but that is the crux. I mean, you're making a great point because if it's for that, who really cares? If
Zach,
robotaxi
if
if
I can
robotaxis
jump in
aren't
here.
ready for rollout,
Mhm.
but they want to make a low cost Tesla using this process, I don't know, but yeah, let's keep going just on the process. Steve, what do you got?
Um, I wanted to point out that every new process never goes as easily and as smoothly as you expect. We always assume that, hey, it's new, it's going to be great, and it's going to work right from the start, and it doesn't. Uh, 25 years ago, the Japanese introduced a new technique. It was called just-in-time manufacturing, where all of the components were from their suppliers arrived at the factory all at once. And the advantage was that they didn't have to warehouse all this stuff. So the suppliers did the warehousing, which saved the manufacturers quite a bit of money because they didn't have to build huge warehouses. But it didn't work very well at the beginning
Mhm.
because people didn't know what the process was like. And it took a couple of years for it to sink in. And now it's common throughout the industry, except that something else has crept in, and that is the disruptions to supply chains. Just in time assumes that the parts will be there just in time. And if they're not, that's everything stops.
Yeah,
So
it's funny. I remember that being a topic we learned about in grad school as a fairly new process 20 years ago. It's like,
yeah,
what? It was 20 years ago? Oh, well, let me do the math again. But it is, yeah, it is funny how these things evolve and it's become the norm. But then we had COVID, we had other issues that caused supply chain disruptions that really, I think, made a lot of manufacturers question, especially Elon and Tesla. But I mean, everybody question the norm of supply chains and how they might improve that to avoid uh, being at the mercy of such disruption so much. And it seems like this is partly came out of that from I
Yeah.
think sort of was like, how can we do this in a way that won't be as easily disrupted, right? I mean, Paul, is that your understanding of it, or is it just or
Um,
is it just about
I don't
cost
know
and
if it'll
simplicity of
affect
manufacturing?
the. I mean, I always felt Tesla tried to control their disruption a couple of different ways. One is there was a lot of microcontrollers, and when they couldn't get one, I know their software talent, is very high level, and they would just quickly in a month or two substitute another microcontroller, where the traditional Ford and GM had a lot of times they didn't have the talent to do that. Only their supplier could do that. Um, so they would solve it that way. The other is just they're more vertically integrated than almost anyone else except BYD, and they could prioritize things where when you have a supplier, the supplier has five main customers, and you may not. You got to talk
Mhm.
them into considering you being the most important. Where if it's internally, you can decide, oh, okay, the one for Model Y is more important than the one for the Model S. We'll shut down our Model S line for a little while.
I,
Uh,
I s-
I don't know if that answered your question or not, but
I think to his point, like flexibility is important and it's becoming more important. The iterative approach. I think that's somewhat of a challenge with the giga castings in that it's very large components, very hard to modify. It makes iteration a little bit of a challenge. It'll be interesting how this affects iteration and how fast they can move product forward. Or is it more of let's make a whole bunch of one thing and reduce the cost as much as possible through this one process? Um, the other thing that goes along with that kind of mindset, and it's one thing that's really kind of crystallized in my head lately, is Tesla's become much more of an idea driven company than an objective driven company. And there are multiple ways that you can cut costs, right? If your objective is to cut costs, a lot of these aren't sexy. It's like I can use high strength steel, which with better stamping and could do all these things, cut costs. Tesla's become very idea driven. This is their idea. This is what they're promoting. They're selling it to their people. And with any idea, there are always pluses and minuses. There are costs and benefits. I think that Tesla has not necessarily considered all of the potential costs. If you're running a taxi fleet, you want repairability. If you're designing something to come together at the very end, that design for repairability it takes second fiddle. Tesla overall has designed their cars to go together once. And that's been a trend, and that lets them optimize to that process. But if you talk to Hertz, when they actually had to repair them, they they had very high repair costs. This, if they follow that process, would lead to those even higher repair costs because you have things that wouldn't go together normally if you optimized the process and come together at the end. You don't want to split the car in half in order to deal with
Yeah.
those types of situations. So I think that it's going to depend on the application, depend on the market. In third world or developing countries, people fix their cars a lot more. Here, we tend to dispose of them when they've had a minor accident. And I think that that's going to change the perspective in terms of where this actually ends up. The other thing that goes along with this being more idea driven than objective driven is you have to have a level of conceptual fixedness to stick with the idea. You see, the Cybertruck, we stuck with the idea. The idea wasn't, let's make the best truck, let's make this idea into the best truck possible. So when you have that conceptual fixedness, you kind of run counter to this first principles thinking that you would apply to other people, you would apply externally, but you're not looking at that internally. And as you become a more established automaker or whatever, or even established in your career, you have to start a little more introspection. It's not like, Dad, you're doing everything wrong. It's like, well, what am I doing wrong? I'm the dad now. Kind of look internally. And I think that's been a challenge lately with the evolution of Tesla, in that they need to start looking at what the challenges are internally in order to get to that next level and answer the questions why, not just ask the questions why.
I feel like you come at this like a smart consultant would. but yeah, two things on that. One is like the issue with Hertz and repairs in general for a long time. It wasn't even necessarily, well, a big part of it was like that they relied on Tesla for supplies, that companies that would do the repair work needed to be used to a Tesla, needed to know what they were doing, especially with the different tech that's involved. Even just getting your tires changed by a tire, like the Teslas are everywhere here, everywhere, all over the place. But I go to a tire place that's worked on my Tesla for years, and they've done other Teslas, and they still sometimes have trouble with what they should be doing on the service screen when they're doing something simple like changing tires or whatever, rotating tires. So I think there's the network of people who are familiar with a Tesla to be able to do it. There's a supply, having the supply there from Tesla when you need a unique Tesla supply. And I guess that it's a great point that you bring up, because the concern for me would be then, like, there's a whole new type of way of building a car. How much would that create issues with supplies again? Getting them from Tesla, if they're uniquely made from Tesla or by Tesla, or even having the familiarity, and the comfort to like to work on a car that's built different, that's been done differently. So I think that's a really important point, really interesting one, because I know we were all very excited when Hertz decided to order tens of thousands of Teslas and other EVs eventually as well. And we got really behind that idea. And then it was like, had to like tuck the tail between our legs a little bit when it ended up they had issues with supplies and repair time and all this stuff. And then other issues like they were more likely to be in accidents, probably because people were driving them like on the YouTube videos they saw, like how fast can you get to 60, but this is a whole different matter. The second issue, the I really love this, like I said, this consultant's idea you bring in here, like of yes, starting with an idea, and it just made me wonder. And this is an issue I've wondered about a lot over the years, like how much things have changed at Tesla since JB Straubel has left. And I know he's on the board, but like Elon is like an ideas man. He's always looking for that revolutionary idea. Once he thinks he's got one, he will spend years working on it. He will do everything to perfect it. But it's sort of, he's driven by disruptive ideas, kind of like, this is like, he's driven by things that tingle his mind. And I always feel like JB Straubel was kind of a tinkerer, someone who's just going to be in there incrementally trying to improve something, like, hey, let's try this. Oh, what about we do this? More of a kind of like, how do you like move from here to the next step and then there to the next step? This kind of like traditional, I would say maybe traditional engineering or tinker kind of approach. And I really do think, and people treat me as a total hater these days, but I really do worry and think and wonder if Tesla isn't really missing that kind of person as the lead of their tech development, because Tesla has now gone through a few CTOs since. I mean, there have been a number of people who have sort of tried to take that role and then have moved on. And I just wonder how much it's driven by Elon's ideas versus like a JB Straubel kind of like, how do we master this? And then how do we go from there to there to there to there incrementally? I don't know. This is just obviously
Yeah,
we're not inside the company, but that's sort of the
I
feeling.
mean, I do agree that you do need someone who can stand up to Elon and isn't afraid to tell him he's wrong. And that's a little bit what you're getting at is that
And I'll let you keep going, but
obviously Elon has a lot of good ideas, but he also has a lot of bad ideas, and he needs um, to respect when one of his ideas isn't good, and I think you're getting at originally JB uh, came in kind of at the same time, and it's possible with these newer people, he doesn't respect them or listen to them, but that's just speculation. Um,
yeah, it's all speculation. I mean, I don't even know if it just that's the feeling I get, and sort of countering myself. Like I said, JB is on the board. Like
Mm.
he can advise quite. Like he can say, I think you need this more, or I think you should be doing this more. Like, so it's not like, I don't know. It just, but like you said, if no one else came in at the same time as Elon and JB and started, I mean, there's a few, I don't know if there's any of them left. There's like, many of them have gone on. So you do wonder like how much there's someone who has a different approach and equal respect, right? But anyway, but at the moment we're talking about a potentially revolutionary idea. Let's get back on track. Sorry for sidetracking us.
yeah, I did have one thing I don't think we've touched on, and one of the objectives is to make the the cars so that Optimus can put them together. So we haven't they talk a lot about connectors, that it's hard if you just have two wires. It's hard for a robot to put those together. I know there was a patent a while ago that had more solid connectors so that it'd make it easier for a robot to connect two wires together. But I think that's also one of the objectives of the unboxing is to increase the automation, whether it's a human robot or the traditional um, big robots that could deal with things.
Zachary, I think you bring up a good point. If you have something that's manufactured in a different way, there's two things that are going to be impacted. One is repairability, because people aren't going to know how to do it. And the other is insurance costs, because the cost of repair is going to be higher than for a traditional car, at least until the industry figures out how to deal with this new thing. Um, the cost of insurance can be an important factor for somebody who's considering a new automobile. So if you're trying to reduce costs so you can reduce the purchase price, that's a wonderful thing. But if your total cost of ownership goes up, that's not so wonderful.
Yeah, well, we're one more. Okay, there's a couple more things that it would
Yeah.
be interesting to go down. But one thing a lot of readers have brought up is the issue of like uh, gluing things together instead of welding. I don't know if either of you have much info, and any of you have much info or thought on that. I personally don't. It was clearly like an interesting idea brought in, but I don't really know what I know and what I don't know.
I have a few thoughts on there. The one thing I would say about this process is the limitation is that it's one thing. You aren't able to weld and glue, and like you can use mechanical fasteners and glue. And is that always going to be the best solution for that critical junction? And right, to be clear, the box is the safety cell. This is the most important part of the entire structure. It's the part that keeps you alive. And is that the best solution at that junction? Is limiting yourself just to that solution the best solution? Is the painting it first and then gluing it together? Is that the best solution? Is this only as strong as the paint on the panels that you're gluing to? I mean, if you've ever had paint chip, I don't want that to be what's keeping me alive. So I think that there are a lot of questions that need to be answered on this. I don't like the idea of the limitation of glue. You can have vehicles that are glued together, and a lot of the times they're glued together in layers. So it's this panel and that panel, and it's multiple points of connection. The fact that you have one connection, which is presumably linear. It's all being connected together, maybe a couple bolts hold in place while the glue's holding. That seems like a limitation that I would not want on the most critical part of the vehicle structure. That is not to say that the glue can't hold and that it can't work. It's just that's a limitation, and that limitation may change the materials you have to use. That may increase costs in different areas. You also have to think about sealing. Sealing has also had some Tesla recalls on it in terms of water leakage. If you are using steel and aluminum, you also have to think about galvanic corrosion and all these other things that would happen when all these pieces are being put together. Um, Having it in an area where I cannot make it hot, I cannot weld it, I can't do a number of other things where I'm just kind of building it up in layers. That is a limitation. Doesn't mean it can't work, but once again, it's if you only look at the pluses, don't look at the minuses. It's one of those things that needs to be balanced out and thought through, which I'm not sure that they've thought through yet. And it's a work in progress. So yeah.
Yeah, I thought Paul wanted to chime in, but yeah, I just keep coming back to the thought that in an ideal scenario, this is a brilliant idea that cuts costs, cuts processes down. It's the whole delete, delete, delete what you don't need, and create a simpler process from the ground up. And in the end, it's a more efficient, more cost efficient way to build a car, at least some cars. But even if that's the case, I just wonder about how long it takes to get all these things right. How long it takes to discover problems they weren't aware of because no one's really done this before. I mean, like I do come back to the idea, okay, they have a ton of manufacturing experience. They build a couple million cars a year. They have years of doing this now. They have the ability to think through a lot of issues and potential issues, but that doesn't mean they won't miss anything. And it does make me wonder, like, whether it's in the process itself, something later on with repairability, something later on with the supply chain. It does make me wonder how long it would take to get to that ideal state with this, even if it is a better process. And just historically, I mean, everyone knows it. There's no hiding that Elon Musk has an issue with timelines, and he tends to think that new revolutionary things are going to happen much sooner, sometimes years or even more than a decade sooner than they end up happening. So how much could it be a problem that is so hard to get to the mass manufacturing state that it's or effectively that it ends up being a problem for the company, a weight on the company, rather than a way of getting ahead of the competition. I don't know. I don't really even have like an opinion on it. I worry. I would worry about it, and I wonder about it.
I would give a couple, maybe 3 counters to that. Not that there can't be a lot of problems, but, one counter is we don't know when they started working on this, although we know, okay, you can start development 10 years ago. It all comes to a head when you're actually trying to ramp production. So no matter how early they started on it, um, you do make a good point. Once you actually use it versus develop it, it's a lot tougher. The second thing would be, I guess, the Cybertruck. The Cybertruck had so many innovations, steer by wire, 48 volt, things like that. And although it hasn't been a successful product for a variety of other reasons, I was amazed at how they were able to put in so many new things in that relatively. I mean, they had a couple minor recalls, but that went relatively well. And the third would be what Jensen, the CEO of NVIDIA, has said about Elon's ability to use his which I know isn't manufacturing, but he has said that, oh, it'd take 4 years for someone to make a data center, and Elon did it in so many days. So he's it's obviously a different subject, but they've definitely shown the ability to sometimes do things way faster than anybody else.
Yeah, all great points. And I think the patent like just came out, but they must have applied for it a long time ago. We know they've been working on it for years, so there's some good points for sure. And I think
I think to his point, speed is going to be important on this, not just how long it takes you to figure it out, but if something changes, what happens with that? So one thing that I noticed in a few BYD pitches was that they have bulkhead penetration tests that they're putting on their supplemental safety tests. Teslas really don't have a bulkhead like what you used to call firewall. They have a sheet of plastic. That becomes a thing. How long does it take you to change your new system to provide that panel? So that would be one. They also did some tests with secondary impacts. Now, castings can be safe and you can design them, but it becomes a challenge to design them to take two impacts because they tend to absorb energy by fracture. You have, stress strain, and, you have elastic deformation, which is bending. You have plastic deformation, or like that's springing, like, you know, this is elastic deformation, right? If you want something that'll spring back, you design something with that, you use the right material. If I have to change all the material significantly to something that would spring back or bend versus crack, that could be a tremendous challenge to this new system. Or maybe it's not. I think that thinking through how I could adapt to those changes, maybe castings would be better for, for example, you'd have a front subframe. You want it to break off and go underneath the vehicle in a crash, right? So it's just 3D printed nonsense, but you want it to break off and go under. That's a perfect use for castings, where you want it to break. If you don't want it to break and you want it to absorb impact through a different means and you want it to have different kinds of strength, I think it's important to keep that in mind. And safety standards are evolving. They're evolving fast in China. Door handles could change next year. And because that's 2/3 of the EV sales globally, that's going to drive the overall market. So how you adapt to those changes, not just can I get it up to where it is now, can I adapt to changes quickly? I think that's going to be a key aspect of the success on this. I have confidence that they can develop it to the point where it can work under the current environment, but what happens when it changes? What happens when there are competitive changes where now you have to look at it in a different way? I think that could be a potential challenge, not necessarily insurmountable, but potential challenge to this new system.
yeah, it's funny that door handle thing. That I hadn't really thought much about how quickly China will just sort of expect automakers to change. Like I feel like that would have taken so much longer, more discussion and longer time frame to comply in the US. If it was done in the US, like, okay, comply by 2030. China's like, you better comply by next year. It's just funny how quick they expect iteration and improvement, innovation. But I will just end on building on what you were saying, Paul, because a couple of things come to mind. Is one is I do think Elon most likes to work in a kind of startup environment, and that's sort of what their success has been seen to be built on, is kind of fast iteration. He's much more willing to make a mistake and then start and try again, or to break something and try again. That's kind of startup mindset than traditional automakers for sure. And so you definitely see the potential of quicker trial and error, and then more quickly getting to the solutions needed. At the same time, it is sort of the fact that Tesla still operates a bit like a startup or a series of startups that has pros and cons, that has massive speculation, but also a lot of concern, because if they do it well, if they're able to succeed, there's potential disruption. If they are not, they've got humongous opportunity costs issues. Like they're no longer improving in a normal way and keeping up with the industry. They're betting on breakthroughs more. So it's like they're sort of falling behind with opportunity costs because they've decided, and just clarifying opportunity cost is like, if they're spending time and money on this, they're not spending on other things, more incremental improvements, for example. So there's like, you could see what if it works. It's again like, oh, what a genius way to disrupt how things have been done for decades or a century. If it does, if it turns out this series of startups that are sort of currently Tesla, if none of them really work, or if it takes too long, I mean, that's how a lot of startups die. It's not necessarily even the idea is bad. It just took too long to get from the idea to commercially profitable mass manufacturing. So it's like, and we've seen like Tesla's issues with solar shingles, with Robotaxi.
That's exactly what it made me think of, the solar roof. That was
Yeah.
such a great idea, but I assume they just
Mhm.
couldn't make it work
Yeah.
well
So,
enough to roll it out.
yeah, I would
I
end.
mean, they rolled it out, but
Yeah,
to
I
make
mean,
it
one of our
successful.
writers has one, but it's just they haven't been able to make it cost competitive. But yeah, so that's my final thought on it. I mean, there's sort of the state of Tesla right now. It's decided to, I would say, sort of pivot, because it was on the track of becoming like a mass manufacturer of automobiles. With It had matured, and then the normal course of events would be to stay mature and incrementally improve and innovate. But instead, he sort of decided, I'm not really into that. Let's continue to try to disrupt. And now is the question of, can they disrupt in other ways again beyond what I would sort of say was a simpler disruption? Like, I know maybe that's just looking back. Maybe, maybe it wasn't, but just building electric cars that are mass produced and competitive on costs, it just, to me, that feels a little bit more straightforward than completely changing how cars are built, or if they can drive themselves all over the world. Anyway, I tried to close in a clean way and I messed myself up. But any closing remarks from all three of you?
I don't know if you want to get into the story yesterday about Robin Denholm suggesting that
Oh,
maybe the
yeah.
Cybercab isn't going to be a Cybercab, but actually the long-awaited Model 2. Or do you maybe want to save that for next week?
Yeah.
Let's touch on it. Because I'm curious what you guys think, because the first of all, the wording around it was interesting, but we've had this topic come up and get killed. Like you said in your article, it was going to be built in Mexico, then in Germany. Then it's like, and Elon has said that they're definitely doing it, and then we've reports it's not. So it really seemed like Robin Denholm was saying that they were doing this not for just the cybercab, but that they were planning an actual car, but for consumers. But just, it doesn't seem like that's in line with what Elon has said for a while. Like, he's
I was
basically, seems like he's said there's no point in building cars for people to drive
I think
anymore.
that's the story, Zach. The story is that Robin Denholm released this information, not Elon.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really lean into thinking that they're running a side program to build a $25,000 car with a steering wheel and pedals. But that is, I mean, sort of how she made it sound. Paul, Larry, you guys are very tuned in. What do you
Well,
think?
I'll say I am a fan of making another car, whether they just shrink the Model Y, uh, or put pedals and a steering wheel on the Cybercab. I just think it's way too much risk to uh, assume that they can get FSD working around the world and approved by 100 different jurisdictions in the time needed to support the PE ratio of Tesla. Tesla's got a very high PE. That means very high expectations. And but as you said, Elon likes to burn the ships, which is a military thing from, he wants to, burn all the alternative ways, to put more pressure on the, the full self-driving.
So I think something important is what she didn't say. She didn't say that this is going to be a $25,000 car. She said that she would potentially be putting the steering wheel and controls in this. So we don't know how much this is going to cost. A lot of their, oh, it's going to be so affordable is based on, well, you can have other people use it. There's also this idea that maybe it's not even for consumer uses. Maybe it's just for regulatory approval, because a lot of regulatory areas, even if they could get approval for self-driving, still require just basic vehicle regulations that you have a steering wheel and pedals, right? So even if they intend to use it fully as a robo-taxi, they still need these for regulatory approval in many places. It would be, to Paul's point, it'd be a lot of work to get there. I will
Yeah.
say that, to my earlier comment about idea driven versus objective driven, if I am switching out regular steel to high strength steel, adjusting weld patterns and all that, that is never going to make any investor excited, right? Ideas make investors excited. And in some ways, I feel like Elon is speaking, running a company more for investors. He's been far more successful at attracting investors than he has at generating consistent net profits, which gets to the valuation, right? So maybe, there is a method to the madness in terms of how you are getting that valuation up in the process. And if this is what it takes for them to claim victory on the cybercab, even if it's not as profitable as was originally anticipated, then he can keep those investors happy. Then he can keep the valuation up. The valuation grows more than the profits or anything else for the company. So that's perhaps the angle here.
Yeah. I'll close for real this time. But you had me. I was muted, but I was laughing very hard. You triggered a big laugh out of me, Paul, because it is just the way that he's done it. And the thing that it just shot me back to thinking right away was, I remember when they got through and they got profitable from mass manufacturing Model 3, and he said that was finally the last time they were working on a bet the company project or idea. Like that was like they'd gone through several of these with the Model S, with the Model X, with the Model 3, and they had kept having to like survive by the scruff of their neck. And he was like relieved, and he was like, we're at clear profits for years to come, steady state. There's no more bet the company projects or work. And even at the time, like I believed it, because like I saw where Model 3 was headed, the eventual Model Y. I was like, yeah, for sure. But at the same time, there's a kind of sense of like, can he survive? Does he have enough oxygen if he's not doing a bet the company thing? If he's not like
Yeah,
at extreme risk?
I believed that until I read the Walter Isaacson book.
Uh,
Once I read that book, then I'm like, nope, his personality just requires him to
he's
bet the
addicted to
company,
risk.
even though he said he didn't. Didn't you get that out of the book? That that's just his personality.
I didn't read the book. I've seen excerpts and things, but that's what I've heard other people. I think maybe even Steve has noted that he has an addiction to risk or something. He's a
Yeah.
risk taker, like to the extreme. Like, we profile people, and he's got an
Yeah.
extreme. And with the success he's achieved, why wouldn't he think he's going to keep succeeding, right? But I also like, combined with that, I I think he was set on full self-driving working. What was it, 2017, he expected to do a coast-to-coast drive from LA to New York without anyone touching the wheel. That's 8 years ago. And he was set on, this is going to work. What we're doing is going to work. And a year later, it wasn't working, but he had another idea, and he was set on, this is going to work within a year. And it's not like he knew he was 8 years off. Like every step of the way, he thought they were almost there. So I think because of that, it sort of led him along like a carrot in front of a donkey or something. It could kind of led him along into thinking, we're about to achieve it. This is why we're so valuable, because this is a big disruption. If we didn't do this, we'd just be growing our output a little bit by growing market share. There's no way we would be worth what we're worth today. There's no way we would be this special disruptive company if all we were doing now was focusing on building cheaper electric cars. Like you have to do something revolutionary. And because this was like always at the tip of, always right in front of them, he just kept saying, and I think as time has gone along and as it's gotten more costly and more difficult, he's had to develop, and the boy who cried wolf issue has come up. He's had to develop even more. He's had to come up with even more revolutionary ideas that justified all the growth that's going on behind the scenes, at the same time, and all the missed targets. And I just feel like this is all part of that. And it's built up to another, like, I don't even think a few years ago it was a bet the company matter, but I think it's gotten to the point where the costs they are putting into AI, the costs they're putting into developing all the behind the scenes infrastructure that's needed for this, and now the costs they're putting into a new way of manufacturing robotaxis, and just the fact that they're planning to produce cars without steering wheels, like all of that investment, all of the opportunity costs, I mean, all of that. So he's sort of like, he's just put them into another, like, I feel like we're increasingly approaching a bet the company moment with all of this. Like right now, they're still profitable. They still make enough profits quarter after quarter on the Model 3 and the Model Y. But if those get too stale and the sales drop off enough, and the regulatory credits go away, and et cetera, then you quite rapidly get to a situation where this is a bet the company idea again. It's not just it's not just existential for the stock, which I think is clear. It's potentially gets existential for the company again, and I think that's pretty exciting. But I mean, I think it's highly speculative, and I think it's definitely like, it's the kind of thing that keeps Elon alive. So it's got that risk factor that I think he and some others are addicted to. That's my final thought. I think we'll wrap there because we've gone a lot longer than I thought. I think this was a good length, though. I think this is a good length to get into topics. But we will reconvene in a few days or a week, and when we have another good topic to dive into. Probably we will shift away from Tesla because we've done 2 in a row on Tesla, but there's a lot of other interesting stuff. But thank you, Larry, Paul, Steve. Peace.
Thanks.
Time for my ketamine shot.